Hello, this is the CUDAN Open Lab Seminar, Spring 2025, February 10. And we're basically starting a new series, contrary to the 5 keynotes that you saw in fall, which are now online and visible on our YouTube channel, CUDAN Lab. These talks are not selected by Mikhail Tam and myself, who co-organize the lecture series, but they are selected by the larger cultural data analytics community. This basically includes people who have been part of the CUDAN Era Chair, which ended in August 2024, and also people who are sort of like in the vicinity now in sort of a more loose sort of like crowd of people who do cultural data analytics in and around Tallinn University in collaboration. And so you will see in the full program on the website that there is quite a spread again. And we continue our mission to basically sort of like define, not define, but have an emerging definition of what cultural data analytics can be. For those who come from areas that are more humanist, digital humanities, sort of rooted, what we have today is actually rather interesting because it's, on the first glance, if you look at sociolinguistics and cultural analytics with Twitter at the title, this may seem, computational linguistics, computational social science, but this is actually coming out of a crowd which, and please correct me if I'm wrong, David, which has deep roots in complexity science, which I can see here with also your collaborators. Bruno Goncalves is a sort of like very prominent network scientist. Martin Karzai is the chief editor of the Advances in Complex Systems, for example, and Jose Ramasco is also very active in this crowd. So this is sort of something which is rather interesting because it's happening exactly at this interface of things that usually are not found in the same department. So with the greatest pleasure, we're looking forward to your talk. There's one aspect I want to mention, which sort of like, I feel it's almost like having some medicine. I'm a PhD in art history, and I typically look at dead data, which does not become less valuable just because the people who produce it or the platform or the institute is dead. I'm not sure if you can say Twitter is dead. Probably it will be a monster the next 4 years. But we're probably very much looking at data that is quote unquote legacy, but that has a lot of value too. So thank you very much. The stage is yours, David. Take it away.
Okay, so thank you very much for your invitation, Max, Mikhail. I think, I saw the list of talks that you already had, and also the program for the next for this semester, and it's it's impressive. So it's really an honor to start this semester with you.
It's our honor. you guys are awesome.
I think it's a great initiative. Okay, so this talk is, I can be very flexible since I will discuss a few works. You can stop me at any point, okay? So if you want to, whenever I finish one of these works or also in the middle, if you have questions, please do so, okay? And yes, so this is, let's say, partly, hopefully this could be interesting partly to linguists and also people working like you in cultural analytics. Our, let's say, main data source is Twitter. I will discuss a little bit our data sets. But first of all, I should acknowledge my collaborators because it's teamwork. So the first one is the young person, the team, Thomas Louvre, who I co-supervise his PhD thesis together with Jose Ramasco, and I will discuss 2 works, so he did 90% of this work, okay? So I will mention this later. And the rest are senior people, okay? As you, Max, introduced already, Bruno Gonçalves, the background are physics, okay, or complex systems, if you wish. I mean, Bruno, Marton, and Jose. But of course, Bruno became data scientist. Well, now I think he's working on cryptocurrencies. So I think it's much more rewarding, that research. And Marton, well, you know, is in Vienna. Jose is also with me in the same institute, the IFISC. And then I should also mention two linguists, okay? So Lucia Loureiro, who works in Mallorca, and Jack Reeve from Birmingham. Both of them are, work in English linguistics, because it's probably the language in which we did most of the work, or that we studied, okay, mostly. Okay, so first of all, why Twitter? Okay, why do we focus on Twitter? Let's say quick answer is that we have plenty of data. Okay, this is just one of those pages that you can find in the internet, plotting the amount of tweets that is published every day. Okay, so it's around 500 million. Okay, the exact number doesn't matter, but this is the order of magnitude. And if you want to, let's say, make some text analysis, I mean, maybe, of course, you have other data sources like TripAdvisor. In WhatsApp is even more. I think they have like of the order of 30 billion messages per day. Okay. Of course, the question is, what is the data availability of these sources, which have some such, let's say, unprecedented potential. And another thing that it will be quite, let's say, relevant for the rest of the talk is these devices. Okay, that everybody has one. We have this smartphone, which enables us to, let's say, more or less precise way to make a geographical location of a user. Okay, so in combination of the data sources that I mentioned before, that you can build corpora with this, now it is possible to include geographical information. So, and this will be very important for the rest of my talk, because I will, I mean, our works take into account this spatial degree of freedom, let's say, in a very intensive way. Okay. Therefore, on general grounds, what we study are geolocated tweets. So there are corpora of tweets, which are geolocalized space. Okay. As I said, in a more or less precise way. Okay. The first works that address this possibility, one of the first one, or maybe the first one, was this paper published already 12 years ago, the Twitter of Babel, mapping world languages through micro-blogging platforms. I mean, platform is just Twitter. So maybe some of you know this work. This work is quite well known. Here, they just consider a data set of 10 to the 8 tweets, okay? And what they just plotted a dot whenever you have a tweet written in some language, okay? This language detection is automatic, okay? So there are tools which tell you with which probability the tweet is written in this on that language, okay? I will discuss this a little bit further, okay? And this is just an example, okay? They have many maps, of course, in this paper. Here, this is well, actually, this is actually the whole. This world map is the whole database that they have, and you can see that, of course, Twitter is very popular in the US, Western Europe, and then also Japan and South Asia, like Malaysia, Indonesia, and of course Australia, Brazil. Okay, and as I said, I mean, this is, to me, this was like a gift to sociolinguistics. because you know, you have now a lot of things to study, okay, with massive data. And well, here this is just an example, right? So you can actually compute the number of tweets that are written in Spain, in Spanish, English, Catalan, Portuguese, Italian, okay, different languages, okay? Now, of course, you have to understand, and then you have to maybe make an interpretation of those numbers. But I mean, from the point of view of statistics, this is great. From the point of view of geolocation, at that point, the people were able to download tweets with GPS coordinates. So actually, you could, for instance, this is Rome, and you could actually go street by street because the resolution was incredibly good. Okay. Now later the conditions changed, and then it was not possible, or let's say a very tiny fraction of those tweets that you download contain GPS coordinates, and most of them they give you just like a location. Okay. Whatever location means, okay? I mean, this is also very rough. I mean, location can be a city, can be a point of interest, can be a district, or can be a whole country, okay? So one has to be very careful with that. But at that point, everything was great. I mean, you could have this fantastic resolution. The language detection can be done in many different ways, okay? Because there are many of these automatic tools available for free, okay? The one that we usually employ is this Chromium Compact Language Detector, which probably you have installed in your Chrome browser, okay? And it works rather well, okay? And with some confidence, it tells you what's the probability that this message, not a tweet, any message, is written in a given language, okay? And also from the same paper, they plotted the number of users, or the number, if you wish, the number of speakers in the Twitter community at that moment of time, right? In 2013. So obviously, English is by far the most spoken language in Twitter, okay? Then we have Spanish, Indonesian, Malay. Okay, we have a certain number of languages. You have this power law, which is, let's say, appears everywhere. And okay, so you have this ranking, and then what can you do with these data sets? The most, let's say, if you want to study language variation, which is one of the goals of sociolinguistics, the most obvious and most, let's say, straightforward approach that you can take is to study lexical variation. Okay, so here, this is, let's say, a very simple example. You have an object, okay, and then depending on the region in which you live, this receives several names, several words, okay? This could be a shopping cart, a basket, trolley, buggy, whatever, okay? So those variants, okay, if they are, let's say, if they're associated with some geographical location, and there's a significant, let's say, large number of these variants, constitute a dialect or a diatopic variety, okay? So, I mean, every language has different varieties because they are spoken differently in different regions, okay? But this is not the only way to in which one can find variation, okay? You can also have diastratic varieties, okay? Which is, let's say, even more strongly connected to sociolinguistic, because this is connected to the socio, or the, yeah, socioeconomic status, or socioeconomic status of speakers. I will discuss this later in my talk. And then you can also have even diaphasic varieties, where you have different registers. Okay, you have a register which is more formal or more informal, right? This is, let's say, with respect to the different types of variations that you can actually investigate in using any corpus, any linguistic corpus. But also, you have to also to restrict yourself to some language domain, okay? As you know, there are languages can be understood from the phonetic point of view if you just focus on sounds, or you can consider syntactic rules or ways to construct words, okay? So this is the morphosyntactic level. Or this lexical variation that I just mentioned, okay? So the different words for a given entity. And even more, you can also investigate pragmatic variation, okay? Which now depends on the context and how people infer meanings from sentences or from speeches, okay? The easiest way from, because the Twitter corpus is like this, is a written corpus, okay? And it's quite straightforward just to look at this lexical variation. Let's say to look into dialects, to investigate regional variation, okay? Because we have, as I said, geolocalized tweets, okay? And then we have the tweets, the text of this tweet, okay? This has to be compared with the traditional approaches, okay? Of course, this is a very old subject since the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and people were traveling around the areas and then asking people, so how do you call the third day of the week, for instance, okay? And then in France, in the north of France, they would say mercredi, in the south, dimecres, okay? And then some other variants, okay? And then by making many of these questions and many different concepts, then it is possible to define some dialects, okay, which arise from a group of isoglosses, which are basically the boundaries between these dialects, okay. Traditionally, people would ask old people, rural, living in rural areas, males, and so on. But now in the, let's say in the 60s and 70s, now well-known sociolinguists like Leibov and Trachil, they became interested in urban speeches, okay? Not only in rural dialects or rural variation, okay? Of course, this is very nice because it can give you data of very high quality, okay? But the problem is that this is very painful, okay? And also you need a lot of funding if you really want to map precise or let's say extensive language variation, and then it could take ages. Okay, so then I mean people at that time produced beautiful atlases like this. Okay, but nowadays I think it's I mean you can do something. Well, I would not say better, but at least something different automatically from your desktop. Okay, I would say using Twitter. Okay. Of course, I mean, Twitter is not the only way to try to address these problems. You can use general internet to try to understand general variation, okay? What you can do is, instead of going and traveling to those places and asking people, you can just create a web page and then publish an online survey and then ask, what is your generic term for a sweetened carbonated beverage in the US? Okay, and then there are maps like this, okay? And well, you know, there are in the West and the East Coast, people prefers to say soda. In the north of the US, people prefer to say pop, and the South Coke. Okay, so it's for the same object, you have different ways, different variants. Okay, and this is again from an online survey. Okay, now we want to do the same now, but with Twitter. Okay, now the way we construct the data set is the following, without let's say entering into many details. we used to send queries to the Twitter API, okay, and then we receive this kind of information, okay. So we have, let's say, an ID number for the tweet, the text, in this case, hello world, okay, the time it was created, and then, as I said, some geographical metadata, okay, like the place ID, and here, okay, we were lucky, and then we had also the coordinates, the GPS coordinates, okay. Then also, of course, the username or the user that wrote this, okay, and the source, okay, if you were, you were using the Twitter app or some other alternative app, okay. So we started collecting tweets in such a way, so downloading just by, let's say, querying the Twitter API every day, okay. And then we have a giant data set of geotagged tweets from, as we started in roughly 2015 until 2021, 2022. Okay, at that point, as this was mentioned before, Twitter changed the owner, okay, and then they decided that this is not possible anymore. Okay, this cannot be done for free. Okay, and then you have to pay for that. Okay, and the price, as far as I know, is very high. So we stopped, of course, downloading tweets. Okay, but I think we have enough data, which is, let's say, not old. Not that old, okay, because you know, it's from, as I said, from 3-4 years maximum. And then I think we still have a lot of, I mean, this corpora has a lot of information, a lot of patterns that one could investigate or one can find. Okay. Okay. So after we have this, let's say, raw data, we have to clean this. How do we do this? Well, that's also depends on what you are interested in. Okay. Of course, you can remove URLs. You can remove also username mentions. You can remove hashtags. Okay. This is what we usually did in our works, but this is not necessary, right? I mean, there are people who are very much interested in these hashtags, how they appear, how they're distributed. Okay. So again, it depends very much on what what are your aims, your objectives of your research. Again, we use this compact language detector. I already mentioned this, so you can actually detect language in an automatic way. And then, as I said, we keep all the geographical information. Okay, and then. This is also like a further pre-processing of the data that again is based on to try to improve, let's say, the statistical quality of the data. Okay, so typically we discard tweets that are very short. Okay, less than 4 words. Okay, the minimum confidence of the model of this language detector is 90%. Okay, so it means that if the model is not able to give you the language with a probability higher than 90%, also we discard the tweet. Okay, and then we have to do something with the spatial degree of freedom. What we do typically, not always, is to divide the map, the space, into cells of certain size. Okay, I don't know, 5 kilometers per times 5 kilometers, or 15 or 20 kilometers per times 10. So let's say rectangles or of this size. Okay, and then since we have the information, the geographical information, we know the location of these tweets. Okay, then we can let's say, aggregate tweets into those spatial cells. Okay. Again, we consider cells with some minimum activity. Here, for instance, three tweets. Okay. And then another thing which I think is also important is to try to make sure that the users that you are addressing are human. Okay, but because in Twitter there are many bots and there are many official accounts which are not let's say managed by humans. Okay, so how can we, let's say, remove tweets? Well, first of all, if an account tweets let's say very frequently, but a lot, like 10 tweets per hour, we consider that this is a bot, that this cannot be human. Okay. Another thing that we also apply is that if we have like two, let's say, geographical location, okay, with tweets produced in this geographical location in a time that imply a speed between these, let's say, spatial difference, which is higher than the typical speed of a plane, this means that this cannot be a human, right? And also we consider, of course, users that has a minimum period of activity, okay? Of course, all of these, let's say, thresholds can be changed, and we may test, okay, to try to arrive at like a compromise between having a lot of statistics and also that those statistics somehow reflect the usage in Twitter from humans. Okay. There is here, of course, a number of issues that the one should consider, because we should take into account, because there are a lot of biases. Okay, I mean, people have taken into account, and also have investigated in detail the biases associated to Twitter datasets. Okay, so usually we have Western, well, this weird, right? Western educated, rich, industrial countries. Okay, so most of the tweets come from urban areas and not for rural areas. There are ways to smooth these biases. I will mention one later. Predominantly, the Twitter users are young and males also. Okay. Okay, and also educated and high income. I will also discuss this issue of the high income. Okay, but despite these biases, the validity of the results, I think, is quite good. Okay, so here, for instance, you can compare two dialect maps, which contains variation of this double modal construction in English, okay, which has a regional character, okay. So the possibility to say consecutively to these two modal verbs, like might, could, okay, I might, could it, I might, could do it, okay, instead of the standard way, which would say I might do it or I could do it, okay. So this is a construction which is mainly used in the south of the US, okay. So this map corresponds to data taken traditionally, okay, by just asking people, going there, and how do you say this? Do you think that this is acceptable? Do you think that this construction can be employed? Okay, and this is and the result is again that most of the people, let's say, which is not in the south of the US, would say that this is not unacceptable. This is not, let's say, a standard way of using English. Okay, except maybe in Florida, but the rest of the South is clear. And now in Twitter, you don't ask people; you just look at the tweets, okay, and calculate the frequency or make some statistical analysis, okay? And then what they find here is precisely the same as in the traditional approach, okay? So you could see that most of the southern states employ this double construction, this might could, okay? Unlike the rest of the US, which you cannot barely see this construction, okay? So this is just an example, okay? An example of which somehow encourages us to think that these data sets have like sociolinguistic interest, okay? Let's say the positive properties of this corpora is that, as I said, this can be geotagged, okay? It can be collected very fast. As I said, we have plenty of tweets, or I mean, billions of tweets from a few years, okay? So if you're interested in quantitative or computational sociolinguistics, this is just great, okay? Of course, if you are interested in more data quality, in precisely if let's say if this variant is employed in this on those place, then probably this is not your starting point, right? Another thing that also I didn't mention is the sampling. This is something that we cannot change, okay? So Twitter, so you just download, or you downloaded tweets, and you don't know how these tweets are sampled from the whole Twitter, okay? So this is something that you have to rely on that, okay? Another important property is that, which I think is very appealing for sociolinguistics, is that this is, I mean, most of the tweets have like a conversational feature, right? Or informal speech. So it has to be compared with some other, let's say, big data corpora, which are constructed with, I don't know, Wikipedia or Google Books, okay, which have this more formal way of employing languages, okay? So that's this is, which I think is quite nice, because it gives you, to, let's say, a higher frequency of variants of new words, new tokens, okay? So I already discussed this distinction between urban and rural areas, okay? So let me just mention, I mean, this is of course not exhaustive list of works. I mean, there have been many more, okay? Just to give you like, yeah, like a few, I mean, try to recognize the interest in computational sociolinguistics using Twitter datasets. Okay. For instance, let me mention just a couple of these works. Okay, here this is something from also is in English sociolinguistics, and here they consider using Twitter corpus in the US of geolocated tweets. Here, the US map is divided into counties. Okay, there are like around 3,000 counties in the US. Some of them are tiny, and some of them are quite large, like those here in the West Coast. Okay, and then here they consider just an alternation. So how do you say mother? So in general, well, some people would say mom, and some people would say mother, which is, let's say, more formal. But this distinction between formality and informality also has a regional variation, okay? So this is the original data, okay? So you can see that mom is, let's say, more used, okay, this is the ratio, so let's say more blue, yeah. More in the south and less in other countries, right? And then they apply some smoothing behavior, because this is a very noisy data. I will discuss later about this smoothing behavior. And in the end, they were able to produce this map, okay, which, I mean, is very clear. How do you see this regional variation? Okay, these different dialects. Okay, this between the south and the rest of the U.S., especially the West. Okay, but this is just one with a single word or with a single concept, right, or a single variation between mom and mother. Okay. The previous was like a static picture. Now it's possible also to investigate dynamic pictures, right? Like for instance, if somebody, let's say, starts using like AF, so it appeared here in Florida, maybe also in the West, and then it quickly propagated after a few weeks. This can be done with Twitter datasets. Some other, like this art word, appeared here in the East Coast, and then after a few weeks, it remained here. Okay, so you can, let's say, try to investigate diffusion of language innovations. Okay. And here in the IFISC, the first paper that we produce about, let's say, regional variation using Twitter was this one, in which we studied a corpus of 10 to the 7 geolocated tweets written in Spanish. Okay, so we have, let's say, tweets basically in Spain and also in Latin America. Okay, and so what we did, again, here we were interested in lexical variation. Okay, so we had this in parallel with this database called Varilex, which let's say contain lexical variation in modern Spanish. So here people, those linguists, Ueda, Takahaki, they were actually, by looking at newspapers, as also making interviews, or asking people, so how do you say whatever word, okay? And then they had like lists of concepts with the different variants, okay? For instance, here you have car, okay, which in Spanish can be expressed using these different forms, okay, auto, automobile, etc. Okay. So this is something that people know, okay, and now we want to let's say investigate the regional or the spatial distribution of these forms, okay, and then what you find is, okay, this is a corresponding map for car, okay, so you see that some regions prefer to say to use auto, some other prefer to say coche, so there are different. Obviously, the regional variation. Again, for computer, the regional variation. Okay, this is not new, okay, at all. People already know this. So there is here we have a comparison with the traditional data, and the comparison is good. And now, of course, we can do this with many concepts. Okay, here we have of the order of 40 concepts with a few variants corresponding to each concept. And now you can do some analytics, some statistics, okay? And what we have here is a peak matrix, okay, with the frequency of the word, okay, and then the locations, okay? So we have the frequency in the columns and the locations in the rows, okay? And then we can do some, let's say, standard machine learning techniques, okay? For instance, first of all, we do like principal component analysis to try to reduce the size of our original matrix, okay? And then we can, with this data, we can try to find clusters, well-defined clusters, okay? And we found something interesting, okay? That there were some locations which were blue here, which belong to a cluster, and some other locations, red, which belong to another cluster. But they were not a clear let's say, a geographical division between those, between the red and the blue cluster, okay? And then what we did was to plot the population associated to those locations, okay, in the two clusters. And clearly you see that the red cluster is associated with locations of higher population, okay, unlike the blue cluster, okay? So what we are seeing here is a rural versus urban distinction, okay? Not a regional distinction, not let's say dialectical areas, okay? But something which is very common. So in a way, the language spoken in, let's say, Mexico City or in Buenos Aires is more similar between them than the language spoken in Buenos Aires as compared to the rural areas of Argentina. This is more or less the message that, or what the data is telling you, okay? Actually, I mean, we call these super dialects just because they were like two macro varieties, okay, which somehow were suggested not in this context, in a different, I mean, in a, also in, let's say, in dialectology, but in this case, it was clear that there was some other, one super dialect, which was, let's say, mainly based on standard Spanish, which has international character, okay? And some other dialect, okay? This is a super dialect with what's called super dialect beta, which is the super dialect, let's say, connected to rural areas, okay? Which has a much larger diversity, okay? So now, if we focus now in the rural part, then it is possible to find these regional or geographical or dialect areas, okay? So we have one dialect area in Europe and two big dialect areas in America, okay? One in Mexico and Central America, okay, and the other one in the southern cone, okay? Argentina, Bolivia, etc. Okay. So let's say this. I mean, what we did here was with Spanish. Okay. So we saw like three main dialects. Okay, if you wish here, and I would like to emphasize that everything here is done automatically. Okay. So this is not something that, okay, in an informative way, to from let's say from a qualitative approach, you can argue that this is that there is one regional dialect here, another dialect there. This is something that is in the data, okay? And then the analysis that we did was using this PCA and clustering, okay, and k-means clustering. Okay, so we can do something similar. This is our next work with English, okay? And English, we have the two macro varieties, or the two super dialects, if you wish, are American dialect, or American variety, and the British variety, okay? And the question is, the research question is English becoming American? It seems so, right? That English is becoming more and more American, that the American variety is, let's say, is getting more and more popular, okay? And here, in the previous work, if you remember, we were just looking at lexical differences, at the vocabulary, okay? So we have one concept, okay, like here, and then two words, so two forms, okay, like lift or elevator, or rubbish or trash. Okay, there are different ways to, or let's say they have you have the American form and the British form. Okay. In English, we have also an important spelling variation. Okay, the orthography. Now that you know, you have this color or OR, or color ending with UR. Okay, one of them. This is American. This is British, okay? Or theater ending in RE or ER, okay? So you can then define a polarization, okay, for a given cell. Now, if you, or some location that you have of a word, okay, if if this location, the geographical location, has a more American character or a more British character from the English point of view. Okay, and this, for instance, this map here is the vocabulary. Here we follow the same approach as before. We have a list of concepts, okay, and then we have alternations, okay, for both the vocabulary and the spelling, and then we just look for these alternations in the whole data set, okay, and then from these let's say frequencies, we can calculate this polarization, okay, if it's more American or if it's more British. Okay, so we plot the US, okay, and then we see that most of the dots are red. Okay, surprise, surprise, the US speak American. Okay, that's something that we already know. We can do the same with spelling. Again, the Americans prefer the American spelling, not the British spelling, okay? Again, this is something well known. But the interesting result is in the here in Canada, okay? So we have, you see here in Canada, there is a striking difference between the spelling used by the Canadians and their vocabulary. So the vocabulary is basically American. However, the spelling here in blue is mostly British, okay? So this means that there are some countries or some areas like Canada which have this kind of a hybrid character, right? That depending on the domain, you, let's say, apply or you use one dialect or another dialect, okay? So let's say dialects are not homogeneous. Well, you need some, let's say, homogeneity in space, but there doesn't need to be homogeneous in the domains, okay? So let's say, reality is much more complicated. And then we repeated the calculations for Western Europe, okay? And then what we did, I mean, Western Europe just because we had more data, okay, no more than that. And then we had the same for the spelling and vocabulary. In both cases, spelling and vocabulary for the UK, well, they prefer or they use British forms, okay? Also in Ireland, they prefer British forms in spelling and vocabulary, okay? There are some here in Ireland, some locations where the Americanization is a little bit stronger, but okay, most of them is British. Now you look at the European countries, and then what you see is that in the spelling you see more blue than in vocabulary. Again, I mean, this is not as extreme as in the case of Canada, but also is telling you that there are many people in the continent who prefers to use British spelling, even if they most of the time speak with American forms. Okay. Well, this can be interpreted in the sense that most of the teachers and textbook with which we learn English in school, at least in these countries, come from British editorial houses, right? Like Cambridge, Oxford, okay. And of course, spelling, I think, is more difficult is harder to change than the vocabulary. Vocabulary is very flexible. I mean, during your life, you can change you can use new words and so on. But for the spelling, once you know the spelling, once you learn the spelling, it's difficult to change. Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what's quite interesting is that in Germany, you can clearly see sort of the British sector versus the American sector, like after World War II, like like where it's bluish, it's the British sector. Down here, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there is this thing where, the question is what the kind of support is in essence. So why did you look into this? Why is France sort of like more British? Why is I don't know, in Switzerland, Zurich more British? Like what's happening there? Is that British tourists or British radio stations, British music, or?
Could be. I mean, for instance, in Spain here, I mean, there's a lot of English here in the south.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and of course also in Mallorca. Okay, this could be the reason why we observe. But of course, I mean, they're not tourists; they're also residents. I mean, there are people living there all the year, most of the year, right? Also here in the south of Portugal. Okay, this could be the reason for that. No, we didn't look into France. Yeah, I mean, of course, this part, which is on the other side of the channel, I mean, this is, of course, more stronger British influence, but I don't know why. While also maybe the south, also there could be some residents here. I don't know about the center. I don't know why they have this English influence, at least for spelling. But then you look at the vocabulary, and the vocabulary is, except for this part, the vocabulary is mostly American. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yep.
So just to clarify, the tourism was not filtered out.
No, okay. I think the criterion depends on every paper, okay? But on general grounds, if someone tweets from publishes tweets from, let's say, from the same place during, if I remember, were 2 or 3 consecutive months, then this is considered as a resident or not as a tourist. Okay, so I think I'm pretty sure that these people here, they are living, I mean, if not all the year, at least a large part of the year in those places. Okay, and this is now, if you aggregate all these numbers, country by country, so you see that here the Americanization is, let's say, worldwide. Okay, so you see that the American forms for both spelling and vocabulary, they are dominant all around Asia, most of Europe. Okay, especially for the vocabulary. Okay. Surprisingly, even in countries which has a strong, let's say, or very recent British, British colonies like Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, you see, even for the vocabulary, not for the spelling, but for the vocabulary, they are more on the American side than in the British side. Okay. Okay, this is, as I said, like a static picture. Okay, this is something which we have like a narrow time window, a few years, and this is what we have now. Now, of course, we would like to have some evolution. With Twitter, this is not possible because it's I mean the time window is, as I said, very narrow. Okay, so here we decided to look into an alternative data set, in this case Google Books, okay, and then we plotted here the same quantity, this Americanization, this let's say polarization of English in both vocabulary and spelling, okay, and then what you see is something interesting. Okay, let's say if we begin with the vocabulary in UK, so it's roughly constant from let's say 19th century to the let's say let me move this just a moment. Okay, I have to move this window here. Yeah, maybe here where we have some change in the last years, but not so much. Okay, the spelling as well. Okay, so it's roughly constant. Okay, this is books. Okay, this is, let's say, formal writing. Okay, this is not Twitter. Okay, But then in the US, there is a stronger change, especially in the spelling. The spelling was mainly British, the beginning of 19th century. So let's say 60%, roughly, with this metric, okay? And then in around 80-30, it becomes the American polarization becomes to increase, okay? So it becomes like this, and then it becomes flat, and then we have a further increase, and then we have here the internet era, okay? This increase, this rapid sudden change is attributed in our work to the publication of the first American dictionary, this Webster American Dictionary, okay, which was published in 1829, if I remember well, okay. This is because this dictionary had, established the, let's say, the American spelling norm, okay, and then from that point, now, of course, you know, in sociolinguistics, once a variety becomes prestigious, then people start to use it, okay? And then the way to become prestigious is, well, you have books written with this language, with this variety or this spelling, okay? For the vocabulary, the increase was not so dramatic, okay? But okay, little by little, the, let's say more monotonic, but the vocabulary in the end is basically American. There is a decrease here in the Americanization of English just after World War II that we don't understand. Okay, we were not able to make an interpretation. Okay, okay, it is possible that after World War II there were many, I don't know, writers or intellectual scientists who had to, let's say, move out of Europe, and they settled themselves in the US. And then, since they were used to use the British spelling, that's why in the publications of those years, okay, in the books published these years, maybe that's why you observe this decrease, right? But I mean, we couldn't find any, let's say, event like the publication of the first American dictionary analogous here. I don't know. Okay.
Maybe it is just better connections. I mean, you see that at the same time, they both drift towards each other. But maybe just the spread of TV and sort of cultural exchange because of that.
Yeah, but why the spelling, the American spelling decreases here?
Oh, because I mean, if you look at the UK spelling, it also converges towards American at this very stage. So,
yeah.
So seems like that there is some sort of convergence happening in this.
Maybe, I don't know.
So
I don't know.
I've two questions. One is a sort of like more formal question, which is like, what does the x-axis, the y-axis actually signify? Is that a frequency or?
No, this is, sorry, maybe I went a little bit too fast here. This is the year of publication of, of the books from this asset. And the vertical axis is this polarization metric, which is nothing else but the ratio between the American versus British forms divided by the sum.
Okay.
And the indices UK and US correspond to books printed in UK and books printed in
okay, I got it.
Not to the style of the language, but to the location.
Okay, can you go back to the slide? Yes. So that decrease. So obviously, this the maximum is in World War II, like where you actually write the large W of World War II, and then there is a decrease all the way to sort of like 1970, and so. The US were very sort of isolationist before, and then during the wartime and after the wartime, a lot of Americans have been in Europe. So this may explain this kind of phenomenon, sort of, right?
Sure.
And
also American military in Europe. Yes.
I'm bringing this up because, I mean, this is sort of like where, you know, with all these sort of like, what Brodel calls moyenne durée, like midterm kind of historical patterns, we don't have this thing where we can identify, okay, here there's, I don't know, the bombing of Tokyo, the bombing of Hiroshima. But there is this sort of like, groundswell, and it's really hard to identify the storm off the coast of Japan, which causes the wave in Hawaii, basically. And so do you think that that kind of information is in the actual data?
Could be, but the problem with Google Books is that the only thing that they give you is the frequency of the words. That's it.
Yeah.
So if, of course, if you had the books, then you could have yeah, and then I don't know. I mean, we have the frequency of the words, and in this case, we had unigram frequencies. But I think also it is possible to look at the bigram frequencies. Give you, I don't know, some additional information. But the problem again is that your, let's say, accessibility to data is partial. I mean, you know,
yeah, sure.
It's not like Twitter that you have everything. Okay, and then you can investigate in more detail. Okay.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yep. Okay. So yes. So let's continue with English. Okay, but now from the let's say from this lexical variation. Okay. Here, what we were interested in is in cultural regions. Now, the concept of cultural region is controversial. This is something that people, depending on who you ask, they could say this is very useful. It's very nice to study this, and some other things. Well, this is bullshit. To believe in cultural regions. Okay, of course. I mean, a cultural identity. What do we mean by cultural regions? First of all, what do we mean by cultural identity? Because this is like, say, it is like a concept with many sides, many faces. Okay, cultural identity is constructed with many factors like race, gender, age, language. I mean, many things. Okay, so to try to understand the cultural identity of a single person, of course, is impossible. However, here we are interested in, let's say, the cultural identity of groups. Okay, once you try to average out all these individual details. Okay, so for us, cultural regions are those locations which are associated with cultural identities which are more or less homogeneous. Okay, this doesn't mean that the cultural regions must be also homogeneous themselves. I mean, you could have a lot of richness within a cultural region. Okay, precisely because the members of those cultural regions, they have their own cultural identity. Okay, but in this case, it's like a first approach. Okay, so if you want to understand, I don't know, why people vote in the elections like that, or why people like to this kind of music, or like this cooking, whatever. And I think it's more or less clear that this depends very much on the region in which you live. Okay. Again, I'm not saying that if you live in this region, then your culture is fixed. No, not at all. Okay. It's just that the general features of those people there living in this part are more or less the same. Okay, again, like a very first approximation. Okay, if you go really and see the details, of course, this is not true. Okay, and the hypothesis here is that whatever I mean, it doesn't matter which cultural identity you have, which is, let's say, universal, is that your cultural identity is always reflected in what you speak about. So what are your topics of interest? How do you spread yourself, etc.? Okay, So in a way, language here is a proxy for the cultural identity. Okay, this is our hypothesis, the hypothesis of the whole work. Okay, and cultural geographers have proposed, for instance, for the US, different cultural regions. Okay, I think basically what you have is like two partitions. Okay, there is a partition which consists of North versus South, because of this, let's say, North versus Confederacy or Civil War. Okay, and also you have the partition East-West, because of this historical settlement, okay, that started in the East and finished on the West. So you always, and then there are different proposals. All of these proposals have been qualitative. Okay, so depending on which theaters you consider that are, let's say, stronger or that are more important, then you would obtain different cultural regions. Okay, and of course, every researcher has its own proposal. Okay, so here we have a proposal for the 1936. You have this partition that I mentioned before. Okay, this other one is, okay, it's different from the previous one. Okay, he has like a more regions. Okay, this is even more sophisticated. Okay, with you see, you have this not smooth, non-smooth boundaries. Okay, so this is fine. Okay, but of course we want to see if from our data it is possible in an automatic way, without let's say the typical subjectivity associated to the research work, if it's possible to see more or less homogeneous cultural regions. Okay. Okay. So the way we yes. I will explain this smoothing, let's say, method. Okay. Because as I said, the data is that the raw data is quite noisy. Okay, for instance, here we have the map corresponding to the usage of bro, this word bro, per million words. Okay, well, this word is well, has a strong component, a strong dialectical component. Okay, because this is very common in African American variety. Okay, so we expect to see bro, especially in the south of the United States, and this is actually what you see. Okay, so here is the south. Okay, so it's let's say it's more frequent here than in the rest. But again, this is the raw frequency. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, how do we smooth out all these differences? Well, we have this G, this get this order, which is basically a coefficient, which is basically a Z coefficient. Okay, so we have, let's say, W is the word index. C is the index of the cell. In this case, the county of the US. Okay, and then what we do is, since we have the frequencies of all words, okay, we can calculate the mean frequency, and then we subtract the frequency minus the frequency of the mean frequency, and then we average this with W. W are special weights, so it means that we give more weights to locations which are just nearby. Okay, so let's say we give more weights to if we have some given county, so we have more weights to the 10, let's say, nearest neighbors of this county. Okay, and then we divide with some variability here, variability coefficient. Okay, so this way then it is possible to have this G, which is, as I say, like a Z score. So let's say High values of this Z-score means that the word is used more than the average, and negative values means that it's used less than average. But now, thanks to these special weights, it is possible, as I said, to smooth out all the regional differences. And you could see now that BRO is, let's say, mainly concentrated on the African American regional varieties. Okay. So then, in our calculations, what we have now for the county, we don't have the raw frequencies, but this Z-score. Okay. Now we can do PCA, just as we did for the Spanish dialectology. Okay. And then by looking at the variation in the different dimensions, we could try to obtain regional information, or in this case, cultural information. Okay, so this is the first dimension. Okay, once you reduce what you have, the first dimension is this typical, let's say, split between the north and the south. Okay, for the moment, I don't let's say give you the characteristic terms that are responsible for this. Okay, I will mention this before. Okay, but the first dimension is just this split between the north and the south. The second split, okay, second dimension is a separation between, you see here, the East Coast, the West Coast, the East Coast, Florida, and then here the Great Lakes. So it means that we have a separation between rural and urban areas. Okay, just as we observe in the case of Spanish variation. Mm-hmm. The third variation, or the third dimension, is about Texas, basically, and Oklahoma, and then we will see that they have a strong character, a strong cultural difference with respect to the rest of the US. And the fourth one is basically, we interpret the fourth one just as a separation between the East and the West. Okay? So, of course, you can continue, let's say, looking at more dimensions, but I think it's better, or let's say cleaner, to apply just hierarchical time. Okay, that's let's say more, but again, to the Z-scores that I mentioned before. Okay. Now, the cluster number that calculating this silhouette score that we found, which is, let's say, more significant, is 5. Okay, so this means that okay. Does this mean that there are 5 cultural regions in the US? Well, not exactly, but it means that at least our data, our Twitter data, is mostly understood from the division of 5 cultural regions. Okay, the regions that we obtain is, okay, first of all, this American cultural region, the South, okay, the Deep South, okay, which, as I said, has a strong influence from African American variety, okay. Now, the typical words that we find for this region is, well, you know, things related to these acronyms, also fashion, music, food, family and friends. This is not, let's say, here we are not doing a topic analysis, okay? Because these are just words that are, let's say, more characteristic of this particular cultural region, okay? And then what the algorithm gives us is just this list of words, okay? Sorted by importance, okay? This importance is quantified by this metric called the specificity of the word, which tells you basically when this Z-score is high. That's it. Okay, I mean, you don't have to understand the equation. It's just when the Z-score is high. And then the interpretation here is now to try to group these words into more or less coherent topics or semantic fields, if you wish. Okay? So the semantic fields that we were able to identify here in cluster 1 had to do with fashion, music and food, and family and friends. Okay, this is, again, this is the topics or the lexical items that most of the people living here in this region are, let's say, interested, or let's say that they more speak about this. Okay, so their favorite topics of discussion, of conversation in Twitter is about these topics. Okay.
Can I ask a question? Can you go back? So in the previous slide, where you see the colors together, you can clearly see that these 5 clusters basically are surrogates for these 4 dimensions A, B, C, D that you came up with before. Like the magenta one here is clearly urban. The blue one is dominantly sort of the cotton belt, Black people. But now if you go back to the next slide, so there is, you obviously get these words which are dominant in this case, African-American culture, but grits, for example, is a recipe that, you know, everybody likes to eat in the region. So question is, did you look at the sort of like, you know, beyond the sort of clustering, at the confusion of like how whatever is typical for the dominant cluster here, you actually find in other places? Because there is this sort of like, you know, it looks like that there is African Americans living there and that's it, but that's just like what makes this particular cluster swim up, isn't it?
Let me point out that this region is majority white.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying here is like you cluster, but did you also look at the confusion and like how, because these 2 things are sort of like 2 flip sides from each other, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah. Here if I remember well, most of the words were characteristic in the sense that their scores were higher than average.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be characteristic because they are much less than average. Okay. Mm-hmm. But those cases were, let's say, much less frequent. Yeah, I mean, okay. Let me finish the discussion.
Sure, go ahead.
Of the characteristic words, and then because there are, of course, let's say, yeah, some analogies and something that are not so different. Okay. But again, I mean, those words that I write here are the words that typically have a higher specificity for this cluster in particular. Okay, the specificity is written in terms of calculated in terms of these CS scores. Mm-hmm. For cluster 2 is basically the Midwest. Okay, and then if you look now at the words which are, let's say, more frequently found in this cluster, and then you group these words by lexical fields, then you see sports, spectatorship, and school life. Okay, so people living there. So I'm not saying that people living there, let's say, are not interested in food, like in the cluster 1. What I'm saying is that most of their discussion topics are not about food, but are about sports and school life. Okay, so this is how we distinguish between one culture and the other one. Now for cluster 3, this is basically the Rocky Mountains and the north, the Appalachians here, and also the northeast. Okay, Maine, Vermont. Okay. And this is very famous because there you have plenty of parks and outdoor activities that you can do there, okay? And this is actually what we find, okay? We find that people there discuss very often about mountains, tree, adventures, okay? There is also lexical semantic field that we were able to identify, which has to do with personal communication. So let's say, again, this is which I mentioned before, which is, let's say, much less, which is characteristic because it's much less frequent than in the previous one, about understand, told, hear, listen, trust, okay? So, I mean, maybe it's because people there, I don't know, maybe it's like more lonely life, or I don't know, I mean, but this is actually what we find from this automatic analysis, okay, those words. Cluster 4 is urban areas, clearly, okay? And then what you find is, let's say words about violence, okay? Violence, dangerous, attack, etc. They are very much interested in politics, okay? They constantly talk about politics. And of course, some specific, which are, let's say, context-dependent words like traffic, avenue, okay? But this is not different from the previous one, which is also context dependent, right? Mountain stream, etc. Okay. The important thing from this, I mean, that is shared between these two cultural regions, this one and this one, is that they are not contiguous regions. Okay. Typically, what we had in the proposals is that all regions were contiguous, right? I mean, you have a region here, okay, and there were boundaries between these, okay. And then what we found in our analysis is that yes, it is possible to obtain coherent, geographically coherent region, cultural region, like this one in the south, okay, or this one in the Midwest, okay. But it's also possible to have non-contiguous cultural regions, okay? Why? Just because the people here in the Rocky Mountains, maybe they have more in common with people here in, let's say, in Vermont or Maine than with people in California, which is just nearby, okay? That's only. And the same here, okay? People and the interest, people in New York are probably closer to the interest people in Los Angeles or San Francisco than what people care about in Pennsylvania, which is closer. Okay, I think this is something that at least in the works that that we checked in cultural geography, this is something that is not emphasized very much. Okay, and finally we have Texas, basically, which is its own cluster. I mean, they have such a, let's say, big cultural personality that that creates their own cultural region, okay, in terms of, you know, well, the influence of Mexico, of course, the food, okay, and they love to speak about themselves, okay, because you have these toponyms everywhere, okay. Of course, in New York, you will have a frequency of Manhattan. In LA, you have a frequency of Santa Monica. But in Texas, I mean, they always speak about Texan, TX, etc. Okay, so it's all the time. It's very, I mean, it caught our attention. Okay. Okay, so yeah, let me then, I don't know how much we're doing with the time. Okay, 4:30. So this is the last work I would like to tell you about, because this is a work in which we combine a sociolinguistic theater, which is again variation, with a social factor, which in this case is the income of the people. Okay, this is the only work that has not been published yet. Okay, and this was this got motivated in the following way. As I mentioned in the beginning, a language or a variety can become dominant because it becomes more prestigious, because it has more prestige. Okay, but I mean, already Leibov in 1966 proposed that there are two kinds of prestiges. Okay, one is the over prestige. Okay, so the fact that, let's say, books are written in standard form, okay, and the people in television speak in standard language, and newspapers and the people and the school. I mean, this standard form is taught in school, okay. But then there is another prestige, which is the covert prestige, which is prestige associated to, let's say, group identity. Okay, so if I belong to a group or if I feel very proud about being from some region, then I will be attached to this to some forms which are non-standard. Okay, so the typical line from Pink Floyd is "We don't need no education." Of course, is non-standard. Okay, but it's intentionally breaks the rule. The rule of so to try to make this let's say group identity stronger, okay. And this is not new. I mean, this is this has been observed since many centuries ago. I mean, already Dante in his book Convivio, so in the period in which he was writing, you know, well, all of you know that Latin was the main language for scientific works, okay, and also for literary works, okay. And he was one of the first one to use the vernacular, the non-standard language, okay. And then it was just due to in this book he discussed this, and it's due to attachment, to cultural attachment to this way of speaking. Okay. Now, what we did here is to try to investigate this usage of standard and non-standard forms of English, okay, and try to correlate this usage with income, okay, with socioeconomic status. Here, there's of course, let's say, I already said that cultural identity has many faces, okay? Also, the socioeconomic status has many faces. It's not only the income, okay? It's your housing, it's your education, okay? There are many different factors, okay? But the income probably is the most important one, or at least it's a first approach to your socioeconomic status, okay? And then the way we see, or we try to detect also automatically departures from standard forms is by means also of another automatic tool, which is called language tools. So this is basically a grammar checker, okay, which automatically tells you if the sentence that you are writing, it contains a syntax error or not. Okay, for instance, it gives you this this error. This if you don't have an agreement between the, well, you don't have this s at the in the third person of the present tense. Okay, and there are many. There is a catalog of these departures from the standard forms. All of these are non-standard forms. So this is the tweet, the geolocalized tweets that we have in our corpus, okay? And then since we have plenty of data for the cities, then let's try to look more on the for these 8 metropolitan areas in England, okay? So we have to correlate, let's say, the variation or the grammar variation about the standard and non-standard forms in this map with this other map. Here the data source is different, okay? This is data taken from the UK's Office for National Statistics, in which they divide England and Wales into cells which have more or less the same population, around 8,000, and they give you the average income in each of these cell, okay? Then, well, you see, in £1,000, then you have cells which are richer than other cells, Okay, that's it. Okay. Now we have all the ingredients. Okay, on the one hand, we have the frequency of non-standard forms, and then we have the average income. Okay, for every cell. Okay, so every point here is a cell. Okay, with again from Twitter we obtain the number of non-standard forms, and from the census we obtain the average income. Okay, let's say the proxy for this socioeconomic status. Okay, so this is the let's say the data, the results for England, all the data. Okay, and then well, you have a cloud of points. Is there any correlation there? Well, it seems that the richer you are, the less grammatical errors you make. Okay, but the dispersion is very high. Okay, and this is something more or less expected, right? Because the higher is your income, the more likely is that your educational background is high, and so the more is more likely that you use standard forms. Okay. Okay, I think this result is not surprising. What is surprising is that if you now look city by city, okay, then you observe, clear differences. Okay, you see, for instance, cities like Sheffield, which has basically no difference between your income and the usage of standard forms. Okay. And then there are some other places like Bristol, which is just the other way around. Okay. So let's say it seems that there is, and this is let's say what we want to understand in this pattern that we found in this data, right? Is that, I mean, how is it possible that different cities have different correlations for the usage of standard English and the income? Okay, and then what we did was, okay, so let's try to divide each city in let's say 5 socioeconomical classes. Of course, this is very rough, but it's kind of coarse graining. Okay, and then in Twitter we have, I mean, we don't have only, let's say, the text of the tweet, but as I think I mentioned, we also have the geographical information, and so we have we can have information about the mobility of this person. Okay, if let's say if one person which is in one cell in the city or one district of the city, if this person travels to another place in the city or not. Okay, and the probability with which these transfers are done. Okay, and we can plot this in a matrix. So these are mobility matrices. Okay, so let's say if it's darker, it means that people travel more to this particular place. Okay, since the cells are divided, or here are let's say aggregated with socioeconomic class. Okay, then we can see, for instance, in London that people, let's say from, if I remember well, this is from let's say low class to high class. So people from low class would like to visit also cells of low class, and people from high class in London tend to visit cells of high class. Okay, but then the mobility pattern is very different in Newcastle. In Newcastle, most of the people like to go to, let's say, the poor areas. Why? Because maybe there is a big shopping mall in one of these areas, or because there is a university, or there is a hospital. I don't know. Okay. In Leeds, it's the other way around. In Leeds, most of the people prefer to go to the rich areas or travel to the rich areas. Okay, there are different reasons for that, or in Bristol, for instance. Okay, now from this mobility matrices, we can calculate a correlation coefficient, just like we had a correlation coefficient here. And then we can plot the correlation, these two correlation coefficients. The correlation coefficient associated to the usage of standard English, and the correlation coefficient associated to the mobility, okay? Which in this case means higher assortativity means higher segregation, okay? So they say the rich stay with the rich and the poor stay with the poor, okay, roughly speaking. And now we observe a clear, a very clear pattern here, okay? What we observe is that this assortativity is like a metric for the social mixing, okay? So this is telling me that if this is high, it means that people mix less, that, for instance, in Sheffield, that people mix much more. And if you remember, in Sheffield, there was no correlation between the usage of standard English and the socioeconomic status, okay? So the way we interpret this result is the following. The usage of standard language or the standard variety is not only connected with your socioeconomic status, but it's also connected to how you mix with people of different socioeconomic status, okay? If you're able to mix with people of different socioeconomic status, then it is, let's say, more difficult to predict your usage of a standard language, okay? And the other way around, okay? If you live in a city with segregated areas by economic reasons, then it is more easy, so it's easier to predict that you are going to use the standard English or the non-standard English. Okay, this is what this graphic.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you have the issue that there's a sort of confusion going on. Like let's take an example, right? Like I grew up speaking heavy Bavarian in the suburbs, and when I traveled to Munich, I spoke High German. And so basically on Twitter, I would talk to other people, always in the same, like my Twitter crowd would be, in this case, I would speak English, but you talk to the same people. But in your data, you actually have that kind of information, because if you sort of like directly speak to other people, like for example, there may be people I would tweet in Bavarian who also understand that. While there is others, I would use sort of like if it's more formal or sciencey, I would use English or whatever. So the question is, you know, if you travel from a rich area to poor area in Sheffield, on Twitter you would still use the same language, but in the data you can still see if somebody's from the countryside or from the rich city. And actually, you could actually sort of disambiguate if people talk to other people from sort of the suburbs. Do they talk differently than if people sort of like within the city talk to each other? So the question is this sort of something that could be teased out of like what actually this kind of mode is? Because most of these people are not just, you know, it's not like poor people make mistakes and rich people don't make mistakes, but we're probably talking of a large crowd of people that actually code switch and use different languages in different circumstances, isn't it?
I totally agree. Yes, but this is something that, of course, let's say, to investigate this, you have to really go into the detail that this user, what movie or not. While here we are, let's say, it's kind of a statistical signal, if you wish. Okay? So you see, this number that we put in here, 0.1. I mean, of course, it's a very crude approximation, but this actually, well, this one, 0.08. Okay, here. So you see, here we are aggregating. First of all, we are aggregating by cell, And then in cells, you have people with, I mean, this is just an average income. So there are people in the same cell who can have high income and low income. And here, but the only data we have is just the average income.
I'm sorry, may I ask a question here, just about this picture? The tweets you identify with some area are the tweets which are tweeted when people are located in this area, or are these tweets which are tweeted by people residing in this area?
People residing in this area.
Residing in this area. Okay.
Yes, we can identify. Well, we have a criteria that, okay, you can like it or not, but the way that we identify residents is that if they tweet from, I don't remember, from 8 p.m. to early in the morning. So because this time we think that they are tweeting from home. Okay? They if they do this, let's say in consecutive ways, then we are confident that they are tweeting from. So let's say we divide the time into 3 periods. Okay, the work time, the night time. Okay, and they're tweeting. If they're so if we look at the night time, then this is the way that we can characterize if they are tweeting from home or not. Okay. And then what I was trying to discuss is that, yeah, you have to take into account that this is there's a lot of aggregation here. Okay, first of all, is this? I mean, we are removing all the difference because we are looking only at average income in these cells, and also in these cells that can contain, I don't know, thousands of people. We just calculate the average frequency of grammar mistakes or the average frequency of non-standard forms here. Okay. Then, as you see, I mean, you can have people who really speak formally, or people who don't speak formally, or people who do code switching. Yeah, I mean, but of course, I mean, in these figures, you cannot observe this. You have to go to and read the data, okay, or maybe try to plot the data in different ways, or try to define to try to make new calculations, but not here, okay? But despite the fact that, let's say, we are not looking at those differences, to me, this signal is very strong. I mean, the signal is telling you that, because you see here, the R coefficient is 0.1. I mean, it's almost perfect correlation, right, between cities which have which are segregated and cities which are not segregated. Okay? So let's say and I think this is the main message of this work, right? That the usage of, on average, everything is on average here. On average, the usage of standard or non-standard forms depends not only on your socioeconomic status, but on how you mix within your city.
There's an interesting correlation to British synth pop going on.
Okay.
Gets better in the upper left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just, I mean, this is just, let's say, a theoretical model that I will not discuss because I think I ran out of time. Okay, I will skip this because, well, we obtain also a signal which agrees with the empirical observation. Okay.
Would you go back to the slide that you just jumped over, just for
this one, or
the one with the phase diagram, or whatever this is? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is quite interesting. Not because like you should fold it out right now, but there was a similar talk last semester, I think, where there was this neurologic situation at the very end of the talk where there was a phase diagram, and the speaker also jumped over it. And I think that's exactly the kind of point that at some point we should sort of like make these kind of like things more digestible for humanists, because this is sort of like where you know, your thought process ends up there, right? Like if we do complex system science and we look at these kind of things, clusters is one thing, they may be intuitive, whatever, but these kind of dynamics of like how you go from one cluster to the next, whatever, this becomes then, you know, my favorite sort of way to put this is like you go from physics semester 1 to physics semester 6, and it's not sort of something that you catch up on in 2 weeks in a digital humanities summer school, but you should have heard about it and you should have seen it, because it may actually put you down the road to do a postdoc in a physics lab, and then basically this becomes more natural. And actually, one generation down, this may be the most important thing coming out of your work, isn't it?
Okay. Well, yeah, that's why I skipped this, because since I don't know very well the audience, I don't know if they're familiar with it. So I try not to write too many questions. Okay, so that's
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, let me just very briefly think. Yeah, this was like a general conclusion slide. Okay, that I mean, using Twitter, it is possible to automatically detect and define cultural and also diatopic regions. Okay, the good thing is that in principle there is no previous choice of topics or linguistic features. Okay, except in the first works that we did impose the linguistic features. Okay, in principle the method is applicable. Okay, I mean, you can say okay, but you can let's say try to analyze this in other countries. Of course, this is possible. Try to I mean, it depends, of course, on the data, right? Again, so Twitter now is closed. I mean, you cannot download tweets. Is it possible to generate let's say that other data sources are available? I don't know. Okay, the main data source in our case was Twitter all the time. Okay, just occasionally Google Books, and then Census for validation, and also for the socioeconomical work, right? Again, I skipped this agent-based modeling. Okay, and the open questions is first of all, what we see is cultural regions in Twitter, and what we see is diatopic regions in Twitter. Okay, maybe the real world is different. I'm sure the real world is different, but we think that in the end, Twitter somehow reflects, maybe not fully, the real world. Okay, but again, this is well, this is also a question of the representativity of Twitter demographics in I mean, with respect to real world. Okay, and then there is plenty of work that can be done if one is interested in additional sociological variables. Okay, like I don't know, gender, ethnicity, I don't know, many of them. Okay, that have not been treated extensively. Okay, so thank you
very much
for your patience and your attention.
Yeah, thank you. So we got about 9 minutes for questions, or 10. I have 2, but do you see any hands?
Questions.
Let me start with one.
Can I interrupt you just real quick before I'm gonna, so my exit doesn't like make too much uncomfortable noise. I'll get out of the way first. I'll definitely want to recap on this recording. There's so much here I need to process. Thank you very much for the.
Thank you. So in species distributions, people do very similar things, right? Where they basically have data based on abundance of birds and cats and whatever. But one of the interesting things they do is then try to tie it to other kinds of distributions. Like I think the cotton belt example, which is actually this really fertile ground where they then, you know, do this agriculture based on some kind of Cretaceous sort of like previous ecology, and then you have this agriculture. There's a lot of slavery. From there, a certain cuisine emerges, a certain culture emerges, and so on. So this kind of thing is sort of something which rather similar to, like, if you say, okay, like where could you have sort of like particular form of wild cats? And then there's these other layers, such as, for example, the humidity, the altitudes, the kind of like vegetation and stuff like that. And so to sort of like bridge this thing, Twitter versus reality, do you see a way, I'm pretty sure you thought about this, like beyond the sort of like classic sociological variables such as gender, such as ethnicity, whatever, how people define that, these kind of things where you say, okay, there is a more fine-grained kind of like difference that is going beyond your 5 clusters, because there you very clearly have this kind of thing. You got like mountains and countryside, you got urban and so on. But the question is, can this be sort of like, almost like in a topological data analysis filtration kind of sense? Can you have different resolutions in this kind of thing? And then is there something that we can say about that is not in the Twitter data, but something that can be correlated with in a more systematic manner?
I don't know. Of course, the resolution, this is something that that you can impose from the beginning by making your cell smaller or bigger. But also at some point, we noticed that, of course, the amount of tweets is so large. But however, in some regions, some places, there are very few data. Okay, and especially if you're interested in variation, okay, of course, then you need at least some minimum frequency of events to try to understand variation, try to investigate the variation, and in the end, there are not so many. So, and then another thing that we notice, which is also a problem with this. Twitter data sets, is that somehow English is, overwhelmingly popular. You have English everywhere. So if you really want to, let's say, remove the English influence, it's very difficult. So it really, let's say, you want to, I don't know, try to. So let's say, let's go to Europe. There are many languages in Europe, right? But I'm sure that if you want to make such a study of cultural regions in Europe, just similarly to the one we did in the US, it will be much more difficult. Not only because you have more languages, but also because people tweet in their local language and also in English. Okay, there's a lot of code switching, right? So we decided that to study in the US, not only because of the amount of data, but also because it's very nice to have a country which is linguistically homogeneous, that everybody speaks the same language. Otherwise, the analysis becomes very hard.
Yeah. Mike.
Yeah, basically, we have very little time. Let me ask one question, basically. Do you know if anybody tried to study how names of locations are mentioned in Twitter? For example, how many times some different countries or different cities have been mentioned by tweets from city A and from city B and compare it, etc.
No, why are you interested in this?
Well, it's sort of a proxy for one thing, it is sort of a proxy of how people move, probably, but also it is sort of tells you something about worldview of people from one place and from another place. What places Londoners speak about, what places, I don't know, Liverpoolians speak about. It is probably a different set of places, and it says something about the sort of cultural surroundings, so to speak.
I see. Not that I know, but yeah, it could be very interesting to see. Also, maybe one could make like a ranking of popularity of places, or I don't know, something written. Yeah. No, I don't remember any work in this direction.
Okay.
Cool.
Just in case, my second question would have been to actually. I needed to get out because I followed at exactly the moment when you described the smoothening technique. And what I wanted to ask is whether how the size of the county, because counties in the United States are ridiculously different in population, how the size of the county gets into there.
No, the size of the county is not included explicitly. However, what is included is the number of neighboring. So of course, let's say small counties are surrounded by, let's say, more counties, right?
I mean size in terms of population.
Size in terms of population. Well, you have the frequencies, the absolute frequency. Okay, not the absolute frequencies of, let's say, the occurrences, if you wish, of a word, not the population of the county.
Because I mean, just a small remark that probably, for example, I don't know, Harris County or Cook County, like Chicago or Houston, yes, they do in themselves quite a lot of statistics, and that it doesn't. It is not in principle needed to average them out with their surroundings, and that is probably the reason why, for example, Denver or Houston or Chicago are not parts of your urban subculture, because they are smoothed out with the surroundings.
Yeah. Very good. Very good point. Also, we have a problem with Seattle, because Seattle had to do also was connected to this cluster of wilderness and Rocky Mountains and so on, and Seattle is clearly a city. Yes, of course. Yeah, the boundaries are not, let's say, clearly defined. Yeah, thanks for pointing this out.
Okay.
Super nice. So I have to close up, but this was an amazing 2 hours. When I looked at the clock first time, it was like 5:35, so we were like 1.5 hours in, but I didn't realize. So that was really, really cool. I would like to, I do the same thing I sort of like do every time, which is sort of like tie this particular session to the next session. So for those who are watching right now, but also for those who may binge watch on the web. So next week, we get to something that's very, very timely, approximately as timely as the last 5 keynotes, which had Russian language under Vladimir Putin, sort of troubling visualization, meaning like sort of bias in visualization, machine learning with Iyad Rahwan, bullshit with Carl Bergstrom. So next week, we're going to do something rather interesting, which is the truth of the matter in the age of generative AI by nobody less than Tina Elias-Sirad from Northeastern University, who has been, I think if I remember well, at Los Alamos before, physicist, computer scientist, but also computational social scientist, who has a sort of lot of long-term experience in there. So she is doing machine learning since before the last AI winter. So we're very much looking forward to that. And because we're going through special times, I also would like to point that there is a whole archive now of these Open Lab seminars, because we do this now basically since 5 years. And the last time Donald Trump was elected, basically on Monday before the election, we had Peter Dodds talking about Twitter turbulence caused by Donald Trump and his rhetoric, which ties very well in with this particular talk. And as you have seen, you're doing this kind of work also for a very long time. But we sort of think that this whole enterprise that we're engaged in, cultural data analytics, not in Renaissance technologies and not in Palantir, but actually enabling a broader society to understand what's going on, is something that is actually very valuable. That it is very valuable, you can see that sort of like the regime currently tries to ban it within the National Science Foundation. So they very explicitly sort of like want to kill any research that is focusing on bias, on cultural heritage, on sociocultural. So exactly the kind of stuff we're doing here. And in that sense, we're very, very happy to have you present sort of your long-term work and have accumulated this kind of work and encourage people to sort of watch it. Thank you very much, David. This was amazing. Greetings to all your collaborators. And I think you're also in the same place where there's this other Max, right? Maxi, San Miguel, which there's not that many with that first name. So yeah, see you very soon at one of the usual conferences, which is NetSci, Computational Social Science, Complexity Science, for those who don't know. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.